The night he carried her through the rain, Daniel Walsh understood for the first time that some people enter your life like weather, without warning, without permission, and without any intention of leaving quietly. He was 41 years old. He ran a small furniture restoration shop out of a rented unit on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled permanently of wood stain and mineral spirits, where the light came through two high windows and hit the workbench at an angle that made old wood look almost holy. He had been divorced for 3 years. Not bitterly, not loudly, just quietly, the way certain things end when two people realize they have been roommates for longer than they were ever genuinely in love. He did not hate his ex-wife. He did not miss her the way songs suggest you miss someone. He missed having someone in the kitchen when he came in from the cold, and he missed the particular silence of not being alone. Those were different things, and he knew the difference. He lived in a two-story duplex on Crane Street, the kind of building where you could hear the pipes knock in winter, and the upstairs unit always smelled faintly of whatever the neighbor was cooking. The unit above his had been empty for 4 months before she moved in. He heard her arrive on a Saturday in October, boxes dragged across floorboards, the soft thud of furniture being repositioned. A window opened briefly, and then shut against the cold. He did not go up to introduce himself. He was not the kind of man who did that without a reason. He met her 3 weeks later in the parking lot. She was struggling with a bag of groceries and a rolled yoga mat and a reusable tote that had split at the seam, and she was managing all of it with the particular focused expression of a person who had decided not to ask for help on principle. Her name was Claire Mercer. She was 38. She had short, dark hair tucked behind one ear and a paint stain on the back of her left hand that she had clearly noticed but not bothered to remove. She worked as a project coordinator for a small architecture firm downtown, she told him, when he held the building door open and they ended up in the same narrow hallway for 30 seconds longer than either of them expected. "You're the woodworker," she said. "Furniture restoration," he said. "There's a distinction." She looked at him like she was deciding whether the distinction was worth pursuing. She decided it wasn't, and she went upstairs, and he went into his unit, and that was the first conversation they had. Over the following 6 weeks, they built a careful, civil, neighborly rhythm. She left packages outside his door twice when she signed for them during the day. He replaced her bathroom light fixture when she mentioned to the building's super that it had been out for 2 weeks and no one had come. They occasionally occupied the same narrow parking lot at the same time and exchanged the kind of brief conversation that both people intend to extend slightly but never quite do. He knew she had moved from Portland. He knew she had a younger sister she called on Sunday evenings because he could hear the particular pitch of her laugh through the ceiling. He knew she took her coffee early, before 7, because he heard her kettle through the wall in the morning when he was lying awake, not quite ready to rise. He did not let himself think about her more than was reasonable. He was not particularly skilled at that kind of discipline, but he practiced it. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in late November. The rain had started at noon, and by 8 in the evening, it was the kind of rain that makes the street look like a long black mirror and turns every porch light into a smear of amber. Daniel was in his unit with a bowl of leftover chili and a book he had been meaning to finish for 2 months when he heard the sound above him. Not the usual sounds, not footsteps or the creak of the couch or the low murmur of a phone call. It was a different kind of sound, a dragging, a pause, then something that was almost a word and almost not. He waited. He told himself he was imagining it. Then he heard it again, and he put down the book. He knocked on her door twice, and when there was no answer, he tried the handle. She had not locked it. He found her halfway between the bathroom and the bedroom, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, wearing an oversized sweater and socks that did not match, her face the color of old paper. She had a fever that turned out to be 103.4. She had the flu, badly, the kind that arrives between 1 hour and the next and takes a person off their feet completely. She had been trying to get to her phone, which had slid under the bed. "I was going to call someone," she said. Her voice was thinner than he had ever heard it. "You were going to call someone from the floor," he said. "It's a valid plan," she said. He got her water and 2 tablets from the bathroom cabinet, and he sat on the floor next to the wall and waited while she got them down. Then he told her she needed to go to an urgent care clinic, and she told him she didn't have anyone to take her, and he told her that wasn't actually the problem she thought it was. She couldn't walk well. Her legs were cooperating only in the technical sense. He got her coat around her shoulders, and when they reached the top of the stairs, it was clear that the stairs were going to be a negotiation. He put his arm around her waist, and she put her hand on the railing, and they got down one flight that way, careful and slow, the pipes knocking somewhere above them and the rain loud against the small window on the landing. By the time they reached the building's front door, the rain was coming sideways. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and looked at the 20 feet of wet pavement between them and his car, and without any particular deliberation, he put one arm behind her back and one arm under her knees, and he lifted her. She didn't protest. She was past the point where protesting would have been useful. She curled her fingers into the lapel of his jacket the way a person does when they have decided to trust something they can't fully see. He walked through the rain to the passenger side of his car and reached for the door handle, and she hadn't let go yet, and he had not put her down, and she looked up at him in the particular way that a person looks at someone when they are both soaked through, and the night is very dark, and everything unnecessary has been stripped away by cold and rain and exhaustion. "Don't let go yet," she said. He didn't. He held her for 3 more seconds in the rain outside his car, the water running off his jacket and her hair wet against his collar, the parking lot amber and quiet around them, and he thought that he had not been this close to another person in a very long time, and that it felt nothing like what he had expected and everything like what he had forgotten. He drove her to the urgent care. He sat in a plastic chair for an hour and 40 minutes while she was seen. He brought her a cup of vending machine tea that she held with both hands and did not drink but seemed to find useful simply to hold. When the doctor released her with antibiotics and a list of instructions she was already too tired to read, Daniel drove her home and helped her up the stairs and got her settled on the couch with a blanket and a glass of water on the coffee table within reach. She was asleep before he reached the door. He came back in the morning with coffee and a container of soup he had made from what was in his own kitchen, which was mostly broth and carrots and a little barley, nothing impressive. He left it outside her door with a note that had the pharmacy number on it in case she needed the prescription filled. She texted him 2 hours later. The text said only, "The barley is excessive and perfect at the same time." He read it 3 times and then put his phone face down on the workbench and went back to sanding a chair that didn't need that much attention. He checked on her again that evening. She was sitting up. The color had come back to her face, not all of it, but enough. She had changed into different clothes and brushed her hair and made a second attempt at tea, which was on the kitchen counter cooling in a mug that said something about mornings being for people who haven't discovered evenings yet. She was embarrassed. He could see that. Not in a way that made her smaller, but in the way that capable people get embarrassed when they have been seen at less than their best. "You didn't have to do any of that," she said. "I know," he said. "That's not an argument," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." There was a silence in the apartment that was not uncomfortable. The rain from the night before had left everything outside shining and cold, and the window above her kitchen sink had a fog on it that blurred the parking lot lights into something that looked almost like stars. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and looked at him with the expression of a person who is deciding something. "Can you stay for a little while?" she said. "Not for any particular reason. The apartment feels very quiet when you're not in it." He pulled a chair from her kitchen table to a reasonable distance from the couch, and he sat down and they talked. Not about the night before. About the furniture shop, about the architecture firm where she worked, and the project she had been managing for 8 months that she described as beautiful and exhausting in exactly equal measure. About Portland and why she left, and the particular difficulty of leaving a city that you loved for reasons that had nothing to do with the city. About her sister, who she said was funnier than her but would never admit it, about the last book he had finished and the one he had been failing to finish for 2 months, about the longest drive he had ever taken alone and what he had listened to on the radio, and whether that particular stretch of highway in eastern Oregon really was as empty as people say. 2 hours passed without either of them noticing. She fell asleep sitting up somewhere in the 3rd hour, the blanket around her shoulders and her tea gone cold, and he took the mug to the kitchen and rinsed it and let himself out quietly. He slept better that night than he had in a long time, and he did not examine why. Over the following 2 weeks, something shifted in the careful civil architecture they had built. It did not shift all at once. It shifted in the way furniture refinish takes. Slowly, with heat and attention, a layer at a time, each coat revealing something the previous one had been covering. She knocked on his door on a Saturday morning with 2 cups of coffee from the place down the block and a question about whether he needed any help moving a cabinet he had mentioned needing to rotate. She did not know anything about furniture, and the cabinet did not take 2 people, but they moved it anyway, and then stood there drinking the coffee and talking for an hour about nothing particularly important and everything that mattered. He found a book on her porch one morning that she had left without a note, a collection of essays on craft and materials that she had ordered without telling him. He read it in 4 days and left it back outside her door with a folded piece of paper inside that said only, Page 64 is right about everything. She texted him 20 minutes after he left it. I know. I marked it before I ordered you a copy. The antagonist arrived, as they always do, without an invitation. His name was Graham, and he showed up on a Wednesday evening in his car that cost more than Daniel's shop equipment, wearing a coat that had been chosen to look casual and was not casual at all. He was Claire's ex-fiancé. He had driven 3 hours from Portland. He was the kind of man who believed that showing up was itself an argument, that presence could be leveraged into obligation. Daniel met him in the parking lot by coincidence, coming back from a hardware run, and Graham assessed him in the quick, dismissive way of a man accustomed to being the most polished person in any room. "You're the neighbor," Graham said. "You'll need to be more specific," Daniel said. "I'm the downstairs one." Graham smiled the way people smile when they want to look friendly while conveying that they have already won. He explained, without being asked, that he and Claire had unfinished things to resolve and that he appreciated that she had needed space, but that space had a natural conclusion. He said this as though Daniel were a variable in an equation, rather than a person standing 6 feet away from him in a wet parking lot. "She asked you to come?" Daniel said. "Not specifically," Graham said, "but she'll understand why I'm here." "She'll understand that you came 3 hours without being asked," Daniel said. "That's different from understanding why." Graham went upstairs. Daniel went inside his own unit, changed out of his wet jacket, and waited. He heard the voices above him, not words, just the shape of a conversation that did not last long. 40 minutes later, he heard Graham's car in the parking lot, starting up and leaving. Claire knocked on his door an hour after that. She was calm in the particular way that people are calm after they have said something that needed to be said for much longer than it has been said. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed loosely, and she looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them performed surprise about what had happened. "He's gone," she said. "I know," he said. "He wanted me to explain why things didn't work," she said. "I told him that some things don't require a reason, they just require honesty." He didn't love that. "People who want reasons usually don't love honesty," Daniel said. She looked at him for a moment, and then something in her expression shifted, as though she had been holding a door closed by leaning against it and had decided to stop. She stepped inside his doorway, one full step. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "After the last 3 weeks, I feel like you probably can. Are you always this careful with people?" she said. He thought about it. "Depends what I'm trying not to break," he said. She didn't answer right away. When she looked back at him, her expression had changed in the way that expressions change when a decision has been made quietly inside them. She reached up and put her hand against the side of his jaw, and she looked at him the way she had looked at him in the rain outside his car, with everything unnecessary stripped away, and she said, "I stopped pretending this was just neighborly about 2 weeks ago. I thought you should know." He covered her hand with his and did not say anything for a moment because some things are answered better by staying still than by speaking. Then he told her that he had known since the parking lot in October, since the yoga mat and the split tote, and the expression that said she did not need help and would accept it anyway. He told her that he had been careful because she seemed like someone worth being careful about. She told him that was the best reason for caution she had ever heard, and she was going to be annoyed about it for a very short time before being entirely grateful. He kissed her in his doorway, with the light from his kitchen falling across the threshold, and the pipes knocking somewhere in the wall, and the smell of wood stain still faint in the air of the hallway, and it was one of those moments that a person carries forward without knowing it, the way grain runs through good wood, permanent and structural. The months that followed were made of ordinary things that accumulated into something not ordinary at all. Coffee in the mornings, 2 cups, one carried upstairs or one carried down depending on whose kitchen had brewed it first. Sunday evenings that included her sister on the phone and eventually, over time, included him on the edges of those conversations, a voice she mentioned first and introduced later. A trip to see a project she had finished that he drove to on a Tuesday because she wanted someone to see it, who would look at the materials and understand what they meant. A Saturday in February when he was refinishing a small writing desk and she sat on an overturned crate in the shop for 3 hours reading a book she had already read just to be in the same room. She moved her furniture into the right places herself. She was still capable that way, and he liked that about her. He helped when she asked and did not offer when she didn't, and she understood that this was its own form of respect. He proposed in his kitchen on a Thursday night that had not been arranged for the purpose. They were eating takeout from the Thai place 2 blocks over, and the window above the sink had fogged again the way it did when the heat came on, and he looked at her sitting across from him with her fork halfway to her mouth, her hair still slightly damp from a shower, entirely herself, and he thought, there is no better version of this moment than this exact moment. And he said her name, and she set the fork down, and he asked her in the plain declarative way that he did things. Not with theater, not with ceremony, just with honesty. And she said yes before he had fully finished the question, and then she laughed, and the laugh was the one he had been hearing through the ceiling for the better part of a year, and it sounded exactly like what it was. They married in June, in the backyard of her sister's house in Portland. Under a string of lights her sister had hung too low and then too high, and finally at the right height, in front of 14 people who mattered to one or the other of them. He wore a jacket he had pressed himself. She wore something she described as simple and was not simple at all. Her sister cried. He held Claire's hand and was steady, the way he was always steady, and she looked at him the way she had looked at him in the rain, and he thought of the parking lot and the split tote and the 80-some-odd steps between his front door and his car in the dark, and the words she had said when he had not let go yet. Later that night, back in a hotel room that smelled of pine from the window they had left open, she said, "Do you know what I thought about when you were carrying me through the rain?" "What?" he said. "I thought, this person is going to be furious about his jacket," she said. "And then I thought, but he's not. And that told me everything." He laughed. She laughed. The window let in the pine air and the distant sound of the street below, and outside the June night was clear and warm, nothing at all like November, nothing at all like rain. Now here is the thing Daniel would tell you if you asked him. Careful is not the same as cold. Cautious is not the same as closed. He had been quiet for 3 years because he was waiting for something that deserved the full weight of his attention, and the night he carried a woman through the rain was the night he understood what that something was. Not because of the rain, not because of the fever, but because of what she said when he had not put her down yet, and she had looked up at him in the dark, with nothing between them but honesty and cold air, and 3 seconds in a parking lot that lasted, in the right way, forever. What would you have done that night? Standing in the rain outside your car with someone looking up at you and asking you not to let go yet? And have you ever been in a moment where everything unnecessary was stripped away and you finally saw someone, or let someone see you, with nothing in the way? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Sometimes careful is just fear with better manners. Daniel knew that about himself. He had spent 3 years being careful about all the wrong things, careful with his time, careful with his routine, careful with the precise radius of his own life. He had treated caution like a virtue when really it was just a comfortable place to stand while he waited for a reason to move. Claire gave him that reason not by demanding it, not by showing up with her own list of requirements, but by being exactly who she was in the most unremarkable of circumstances, standing in a split-open tote bag in a parking lot in October, managing 4 things at once with an expression that dared anyone to comment on it. He had known something then, in the way that you know things you cannot yet name. He had held the door and kept quiet about it and gone back to his apartment and his book and his bowl of chili and his careful life. But knowing things quietly does not make them go away. It makes them wait. And they had waited, through 6 weeks of coffee cups and light fixtures and notes left in hallways and conversations in parking lots that were really something else wearing ordinary clothes. They had waited through the fever and the soup and the barley that was excessive and perfect, and the book left without explanation on a doorstep. They had waited through Graham and his reasonable coat and his 3-hour drive and his belief that showing up was itself an argument, which it was, just not the argument he intended to make. And then they stopped waiting. In a doorway, with the pipes knocking and the smell of wood stain in the air and the light from the kitchen falling across the threshold, they stopped waiting, and what they had been careful around became the thing they were finally careful with. That is a different thing entirely. Being careful with something means you value it. It means you know what it's worth, and you handle it accordingly. Daniel Walsh was 41 years old, and he had spent 3 years being careful around the wrong things, and then one woman came through the rain and up the stairs and into his doorway, and he understood at last the difference.